Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, clearly, despite the title, there is an up. I believe that there's an up more than just a movie. Up, it's an interesting way to put it because up is relative. The fact that up for me differs than people in Australia doesn't invalidate the idea of up or the idea that up is important or that someone in one situation values down and in another situation you value up for different reasons. So you want to put something down, but in the morning you need to get up. So I've been thinking about postmodernism lately because there's been some things happening both in the world and in daily life. Dana is continuing to work on a really amazing painting, but what seems like abstract philosophical concepts have really worked their way into our culture. Michael Knowles made a very good point on his podcast recently, which I like to call Michael Knowles Everything. Michael Knowles was talking about how it used to be that beauty was considered a very important part of architecture. But then, say in the past 150 years, function became more important than beauty in some respects, and then abstract ideas, even to the point of ugliness, being the idea of provoking someone, became more important than beauty. And that if you want someone to love the country they're in, as Roger Scruton once said, that you could start perhaps simply by giving them a beautiful place to live. People are unlikely to despise their country if it's a wonderful place to live. Architecture is always an expression of the nature of a culture. I think it's a very important question to ask, that since you can draw the line anywhere you want, but certainly progressing on, the old-time people would say, Frank Lloyd Wright said from Michelangelo onwards, the decline of architecture. Some people would say, Hermann Mutesius said from Schinkel onwards, you have the decline of architecture. But I think in the popular imagination, you can quite starkly see since World War II, people are valuing the abstractness of money or the abstractness of economy more than the place that they live. And you can see that in the idea of look at the skyscrapers built in the 1920s versus the skyscrapers that were built after World War II. The very beautiful Art Deco, green and gold, green terracotta and gold leaf, something like the Carbide and Carbon building in Chicago, or the Chrysler building, the Empire State Building. And then after World War II, the skyscraper that gets so highly praised is the Seagram's building, a giant black rectangle with black stripes. And it's been satirized by Tom Wolfe, among others, about how this was a great kind of religious feeling, a kind of new Calvinism, a new Puritanism. And I think that's true. But a lot of this comes from the inability to say no to this. And in some cases, Christopher Alexander has pointed this out, in some cases, a lack of detail is actually more expensive than the inclusion of detail. To make a very smooth glass-skinned surface is extremely expensive. And if you're doing pre-cast concrete and you want to cast the concrete in interesting patterns, it's not terribly expensive. Not prohibitively so. There are all kinds of opportunities now, especially with things like 3D printing, to do things like Frank Lloyd Wright's textile blocks. That's where he would cast concrete blocks and then wind them together with rebar. And that would make a very, especially if you post-tension that rebar, this could make a very compelling kind of structurally sound wall that you can make really in any shape that you want. It's just the 1920s than it is now. You have a much finer grit concrete now, and you have the ability to 3D print your forms. Just like the cantilevered platforms of falling water, which didn't make sense before pre-tensioned concrete, now do make sense after pre-tensioned concrete, just like the glass tube ceilings in the Johnson Wax building of Frank's that would always leak because clear caulk had not yet been invented. Now clear caulk has been invented, and it's easier to do all that, or at least acrylic tubes, which you can pressure seal together better than glass tubes. He was always, his ideas were always a couple of enough steps ahead of the building technology to make his building technology at least somewhat annoying. So I think it's time to revisit those ideas. So we're very much looking forward to doing this kind of thing in our projects. But in order to take advantage of all of this as a culture, we actually have to care. We actually have to value these things. You have to care about the beauty of the environment that you're in. You can't simply say that because there is disagreement about certain kinds of beauty, that means that there is no up. I don't think that anyone at all is a serious deconstructivist at all. No one actually believes these things. They might trick themselves into thinking that they believe it, but it's like saying this statement is false. It's deconstructivism by saying that all statements have varying interpretations, and no interpretation can be held to be more valid than any other. So you can't even say that and have it mean something useful if you believe what it says. It is the Cretan liar paradox writ large. And unfortunately, there's a weird corollary to all of this that just sucks the confidence out of a society. And it's not revolutionary. It's not somehow fighting the man. It's not replacing anything with anything. What it's doing is creating a power vacuum. I remember there's a debate online between Michel Foucault, between Michel Foucault and Noam Chomsky, where the young Chomsky before he did delusional things like endorse Hugo Chavez, Chomsky during the height of the Vietnam War debating Foucault in the Netherlands, of all places, on Dutch television. Hats off to the Dutch for having two people who don't speak the language, debating something and pulling that off. So Michel Foucault's whole point, it seemed, was to deconstruct the idea of la justice, to say that the idea of justice is meaningless and the pursuit of justice is merely enforcement of power, which is something that an extremely bitter, cynical French nihilist might say. But Chomsky was saying no, that he was disagreeing with him, and he was trying to say, I don't think you understand. There are Vietnamese and there are Americans who are dying because people are not taking the idea of justice seriously. It's not just a means of struggle for power, and people were suffering and dying because of it. And while we don't have a crisis to this day, contrary to what some people think, we don't have a crisis to this day that comes up to the level of carnage and daily death as Vietnam. I may as well just say this out loud. No, there's been talk lately among acquaintances of ours of people who have been rather confident in their numbers to say that COVID has been killing more people than all wars of the 20th century combined, which is utter BS. I did a quick casual lookup. There have been somewhat over 500,000 people dead to this point from COVID, which is a big tragedy, which could have been helped, but wasn't. And without even getting into all of that, just there were roughly 460,000 Americans killed in World War II alone. And there were about 100,000 Americans killed in World War I. So you count the Spanish-American War, not that many people, thankfully. You count Korea, which I believe is more than Vietnam. You count Vietnam. You count the Persian Gulf War. And count Grenada and any number of little snafus the U.S. military has been sent by the executive branch to take care of. And this is somewhat of a heartless comparison regarding the sacrifice of fighting men and women to compare it to this pandemic. There have also been much more destructive pandemics in our recent past. But we're not living at a time of that kind of crisis like Vietnam right now. But we have these people who at the same time are obsessed with some abstract, what they say is some abstract idea of justice. But then when you look underneath it, behind that veil of propagandistic talk is exactly the kind of fist of direct power that Foucault was talking about. These are people who are convinced if they're not taking themselves seriously, they're being used. If they are taking themselves seriously, then behind this talk of social justice is somehow the belief that all justice is exercise of power, rather than fidelity to what we attempt to be an even-handed principle of good. Because somehow people who are rather influential have convinced themselves that good is subjective, that beautiful is subjective. And this is all of a piece. And really what this is these are the symptoms. These are the symptoms of a culture that has grown so weary with itself, so full of self-hatred, that it is tearing itself down. And there is developing ever more a yawning power vacuum into which whoever has confidence and conviction will step. And I will go so far as to say that this current presidency, the Biden administration, is an example of a power vacuum. That when you have a president who is addressing Congress via video conference, addressing Congress and then says, "It's time for questions. I'd like to take some questions." And then someone cuts his camera off. Is that a small incident? Yes. Is it a symptom that he's not really in charge? Yes. Is this something that's been going on for decades? Yes. That's another thing that we should admit, is that the US government has become more and more of a ceremonial thing. There are influences behind it that push it in certain directions, and this pushing is getting stronger and stronger, and the offices are getting weaker and weaker. And this is concerning, but we shouldn't be entirely despairing. I see a lot to be optimistic about if we stick to our principles, if we assert that there are things that are good, that are beautiful, and that we value. It starts by saying what is important to you. It's very obvious what we don't like, so let's start finding what we do like. And one of the reasons that I run a design company, one of the reasons that Dana runs it with me, is that we both pursue things that we like. And people are very happy to pay us that we give them things that both of us like. And this is a living, our company is a living refutation of postmodernism every day, because we find intersubjective agreement. We find things that are beautiful that people like. Our business wouldn't work if the postmodernists were correct. So I think it's important to say those people are incorrect. They were looking for things to, be fancy intellectuals about in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And they just haven't been budging from that perch. But I'm pretty sure that that their time is up. No one's taking them seriously except for the SJW crew, and they're doing things like burning down cities. So I remember bringing this up when I was at the GSD. I brought things up like this. I pointed out to people that there were people who were breaking the law even back then in 2010. There were, I won't get into details here right at this moment, but there were people who were breaking the law and then saying things very close that you could think that what they said was a Derrida quote. You know, people who were being prosecuted in Arizona for breaking the law were saying things like, if words have no meaning, what is justice worth? And this could have been from Michel Foucault or Gilles Deleuze or any of these, and that happened to be, you know, these hard right-wing criminals who were espousing this. And I brought it up, and people would just kind of be silent and blink at me. And this was in 2010. But these people have woken up already to the idea that these are corrosive ideas, that they drain our culture and our society of confidence, even the confidence to act. But you know what? People know what they like. People know what they like. They just have to see it. I think people who don't have the confidence that they know what they like, they do know what they like. It's just that nastiness in the world has beat that confidence out of them. So go places that you like. You know, even now, travel to places safely. Travel to places that you care about. Watch videos about places that you care about, things that you think are beautiful and wonderful, and realize that you have the ability to make great things and have other people help you make great things. You know, Jordan Peterson's great advice, before you think about changing the world, clean your room. Well, that's a good step. And you know what? And part of that is that in that capacity, at that scale, you can be your own designer. You can make something. It's not just cleaning. It's arranging. It's deciding that you want something to be a certain way, and then realizing, oh yes, that does make a difference. And if you invite people over, you can see how they react. And then chances are, when you deal with things in the physical realm, something that Christopher Alexander has written about quite a bit, you can find that when things are done very, very well, the agreement about the physical environment approaches unanimity, approaches objectivity. So I think all of this is important. That's all. Thanks for listening.